My name is Meg Caldwell, and it is an honor to have all of you here today. I direct the Environmental and Natural Resources Law and Policy program here at Stanford Law School, and I also have the privilege of being the executive director for the Center for Ocean Solutions here at Stanford University. And between us, Stanford Law School and the Center for Ocean Solutions, and two amazing journal groups, student journal groups, the Stanford Environmental Law Journal and the Stanford Journal for Law, Science, and Policy. We welcome you here today. We are your hosts. The best part about my role is that I got to catalyze this event late summer of last year, and then have simply watched the incredible magic of having students and postdocs do their thing. So my role is very minimal this morning. Nonetheless, I am super happy to be the first on deck for you. We are here to explore these emerging perspectives from the natural, physical, and social sciences on dynamic marine conservation. And we're going to be exploring so many different dimensions of this issue, and have in the house people from all over the world and from almost every discipline that you can imagine being germane to the questions that we need to understand and explore and resolve in order to protect our global ocean. We are videotaping this program, so I just want to now remind everyone to turn your cell phones to silent, and also would ask that when you do have a question to ask, that you come down to the mic. There are two mics here at the bottom of the stairs, and we've allotted sufficient time after each speaker for the keynote speakers and after each panel so that you can engage. And the fundamental ethos that we have for this symposium is that all of you here today are also experts, even though you may not be serving on a panel. And we really want your voice to be heard. We want you to ask those probing questions, and we want this to be a very dynamic experience in and of itself. So please help us do that. There are a couple of immediate outgrowths of this symposium that I wanted you to be aware of. The first is that there will be a joint issue between the Stanford Environmental Law Journal and the Stanford Journal of Law, Science, and Policy, for which many of the panelists will be contributing articles. And if you're interested in that process, I would just ask that the student journal leaders raise their hands, and know that you can always go and ask Pete or Dave over here about that process. And if you're interested in getting involved, they can answer any of your questions. The second outgrowth is a working group that the Center for Ocean Solutions is convening on the topic of dynamic marine conservation. And that working group is going to be a process that has been organized not just by the Center for Ocean Solutions, but also by folks from San Diego State, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, UC Santa Cruz, and the University of Maryland. And we're going to be focusing the initial work of that working group on some best practices approaches for managing the California drift gill net fishery. So if you're interested in that topic, please see Larry Crowder over there, or Sarah Maxwell. Where is Sarah? Sarah's in transit. Okay, so, but just know that Larry Crowder, Sarah Maxwell are your two gurus on that working group if you're interested in finding out what they're up to. Finally, I just want to thank our major donor and our supporters for the symposium, because so much work has gone into it. And of course, we, from the beginning, wanted to make this a symposium that was free to anyone to come. Although we had a space constraint, so we actually had to put some folks on the waiting list for a while. But the major inspiration for the symposium is from our primary donor for the event, and that's Neal, who is a Stanford alumnus. He's a dear friend. He's a great supporter of global ocean conservation. He's a colleague of mine on the Monterey Bay Aquarium. He's also in a leadership role with the Hewlett Foundation. And it's so sad that Steve couldn't be here today. He's in trial right now, so earning the big bucks so that he can support awesome things like this symposium. If any of you know Steve, please do send him a note, thank him for this, let him know what it's like. One of the main reasons why we are videotaping it is to make sure that Steve has the benefit of all the knowledge and great dialogue that's going to happen through these couple of days. The last thing that I would say is I hope that you all are looking forward to this evening, because it's really going to be a special treat. We have a world-renowned filmmaker, John Weller. John, raise your hand. Who has, thank you, donated the screening of a very special film. And it's so rare to go to a conference where you look forward to the dinner. But tonight is one of those nights. We won't have any rubber chicken. Instead, we're going to have a fabulous feast for the eyes and the ears. And thank you, John, for contributing that. We have, of course, other supporters and folks who have been pivotal to putting the symposium on. And I just want to acknowledge all the different teams from Stanford Law School, the programs team and the IT team and the finance folks. I also want to thank Liquid Robotics, because we are looking forward to having a well, not live, it's inanimate, but wave glider on display. It should be coming around 11 o'clock. And Greg Polis, if you'll raise your hand, who serves on the board for Liquid Robotics, was essentially the guy that made this happen. So thank you, Greg. Now I'd just like to introduce one of our excellent students and hand it over to the entire student team. Pete Mulligan is a chemical engineering PhD student here at Stanford. And Pete, of course, is quite involved in the Stanford Journal of Law, Science, and Policy. And it's going to be his privilege to introduce Dr. Jane Lubchenco. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Meg. Yeah, so the Stanford Environmental Law Journal, Stanford Journal for Law, Science, and Policy, the Center for Ocean Solutions wants to welcome you all here. And a special welcome to our keynote speaker, Dr. Jane Lubchenco. Jane earned her bachelor's in biology at Colorado College, her master's degree in zoology at University of Washington, and she did her PhD work at Harvard, where she studied rocky intertidal regions. Jane is the former administrator of NOAA, or the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. And there, as head of NOAA, she made science, ocean, fisheries, and the climate a priority areas, including helping to craft the U.S.'s first official policy on the oceans and ending overfishing in U.S. federal waters. She recently joined the Center for Ocean Solutions as a visiting fellow. And she's held numerous posts and won several awards, including as a research associate at the Smithsonian Institute, a MacArthur Fellow, and an active member of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences, the National Academy of Sciences, and the American Philosophical Society. From the rocky intertidal regions to Capitol Hill, Jane's career spans many disciplines and can only be described as truly monumental. Stanford and the Haas Center for Public Service are thrilled to have her as the Mimi and Peter E. Haas Distinguished Visitor for this quarter. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Jane Lubchenco.
Thank you very much, Pete, and thanks, Meg, for a terrific opportunity here. My thanks as well to Steve Neal for his generosity. It's really too bad that he can't be here today, but a shout out to him. But special kudos and thanks to the students who have organized this and who are really leading the charge in this entire effort, as well as the follow-on. It's really a pleasure for me to be here. Unfortunately, I can't stay for the whole time, and I'm really frustrated at that. The planning of this, I think, was well underway when Meg realized I was on campus and said, hey, come over and join us. And I said, but I have other things I have to do that are already scheduled that I can't change. So my apologies that I can't be here the whole time. The program looks absolutely spectacular, and I'm really, really excited about the opportunity to have this international group of folks really engage in some very important issues. What I'm going to do this morning in my keynote remarks is focus very much on perspectives that I have, having been fresh out of 4 years of service in Washington, D.C. as the administrator of the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. And in particular, I want to give you some insights into not only some of the things we're able to do, but what I see as some of the challenges going forward, what some of the impediments are, both nationally as well as internationally. And I hope to seed some ideas and some connect the dots across a number of different topical areas that I hope you will be able to pick up on during the rest of the symposium. So reflections on progress, some of the stumbling blocks, some of the actual brick walls that we ran into, as well as some of the challenges going ahead. Now, to set the stage for you, I have to just give you a sense of the breadth of the portfolio that NOAA is responsible for, because making progress on fisheries and oceans is only part of NOAA's responsibility. NOAA also contains the National Weather Service, and so makes forecasts about weather. And to do that, it builds and flies satellites. NOAA is also very focused on climate, understanding climate science, keeping the climate records, sharing information about climate change by way of what we call climate services. So a very, very broad portfolio: weather, climate, oceans, coasts, satellites. It's a science agency. It does and funds science, and then uses that science to make policy, make management decisions, and shares that science with the broader world. So using, communicating, and doing science. Now, before I went to NOAA, I had been in the academic world most of all of my professional life, and in that capacity was playing the role of providing information, advising, suggesting, understanding trade-offs for policymakers and managers. And it was a very different experience to actually be a decider, as someone has called himself, a decider who actually is making decisions, not just making recommendations, but making decisions. That said, even the head of an agency like NOAA is not completely in charge. There are lots of other players. Congress has a very important role to play. The White House, other agencies, in the case of fisheries, fishery management councils, and lots of other players. So it is not possible for one person to just sort of wave a magic wand and make things happen. It has to be using science, but with a very serious focus on diplomacy, on working together in partnerships with so many other entities inside the government, in this case the federal government, and outside the government. So the complexities of the creation of management and policy are significant. And it's important to understand those as we think about how can we make progress, how can we keep good things going, how can we prevent disastrous things from happening. That broad portfolio would be a very significant challenge under any set of circumstances. But the last 4 years have been an amazing confluence of craziness, I guess is the best way to put it. Sort of at large, Washington, there is a very poisonous atmosphere that results in highly partisan, very political approaches to a lot of policy issues. So it's more about politics than about policy. And that makes a major challenge. So what I would call dysfunctional Congress. I'm hopeful that that will get better. There are some signs that there are some common ground being found on a few issues, but it is a major challenge. The economy was in a tailspin for almost all of the 4 years that I was there. That presents some very significant challenges. Because NOAA is the science agency within the U.S. government that really holds the climate records and provides climate services and does a lot of climate science, we were the target of a lot of the politicization of the science around climate change. We had some major challenges with our weather satellites in getting both structuring the management of them or restructuring a dysfunctional management system and then getting the resources. And it's important that you understand that the weather satellites are so vital to NOAA's ability to provide accurate weather forecasts and disaster warnings. The weather satellites provide over 90% of the data that go into our weather models, and so that's actually really important. And it affects not just the Weather Service, but those satellites provide a lot of information about oceans and ocean changes. And so integrating all the different parts of NOAA and solving all these different problems is a very significant challenge. Now, as if that weren't enough, we had Deepwater Horizon, which was a major, both environmental as well as human tragedy, and took a lot of time and energy on the part of folks at NOAA. And on the weather side, we had the most extreme 4 years of weather of any time in U.S. history, the most extreme. There were 770 major tornadoes. Think about that. That's a lot. These are EF3, 4s, and 5s. There were over 70 Atlantic hurricanes, including Isaac, Sandy, Irene. 6 major floods occupying very significant area of the United States. 3 tsunamis. We had historic drought, prolonged heat waves, and record snowfall and blizzards. So that portfolio across the weather, climate, oceans, coast, satellites is a major challenge under any times, but in the last 4 years there were some particularly significant challenges that had to be met. Despite that, we were able to accomplish a lot. And I want to focus my attention on oceans and fisheries because that's what we're about here today. But I wanted you to have a sense of the context in which those decisions are made. And it's this broader set of challenges and how there are interactions across them that I'm emphasizing here. So multiple significant accomplishments. Ensuring the continuity of the nation's weather and environmental satellites was one. Developing a weather-ready nation. Promoting climate and ocean acidification science. Delivering quality climate products. Strengthening science and ensuring scientific integrity at NOAA. And delivering the highest quality science, services, and stewardship to the nation are some of the things I'm not going to talk about, but I want you to keep in mind that was part of the overall suite of deliverables that we can point to. So shifting to today, I want to focus on the efforts, the experiences that we had in restoring fisheries to both sustainability and profitability, and restoring oceans and coasts to a healthy state. And in particular, I want to talk about some of the progress, but some of the stumbling blocks, some of the brick walls, and I want to do so by way of 4 primary areas where I'll go into a little more detail. The National Ocean Policy, U.S. fisheries, European fisheries, and international fisheries are those 4. And then I'm going to touch just very briefly on 3 other topics, habitat, aquaculture, and marine protected areas, marine reserves. So that's sort of the lay of the land. So let's dive right in to a very important topic, healthy oceans. The context that many of you are well aware of, but I want to remind you of, are the two ocean commissions that were created that reported out in 2003 and 2004, specifically the Pew Oceans Commission and the U.S. Commission on Ocean Policy, both of whom had very comparable findings and recommendations. Both said the U.S. policies and practices in oceans are not up to the challenge of doing justice to this very precious set of resources and responsibilities that the country has. There should be a much stronger focus on stewardship, not just exploitation, and there needs to be much better integration across the federal agencies and with the regions. There are over 140 different federal laws and regulations that affect oceans directly. There are dozens of federal agencies whose practices and policies somehow affect oceans. And there was no good coordination across these. The commissions also pointed out that the U.S. has the largest EEZ in the world, exclusive economic zone, that if you total up the area of the oceans over which the United States has responsibility, it is equivalent to about 1.5 times the continental United States. So it's a huge, huge area. And most Americans think of the U.S. as stopping at its borders. And one of the challenges is to have Americans appreciate that their nation is actually an ocean nation, and that there are significant opportunities and responsibilities that come with that. Early on, during President Obama's first term, he set up an interagency ocean policy task force that was charged explicitly with looking broadly across ocean practices and policies and making recommendations to him. This was composed of 26, I think it was, either 24 or 26 different federal agencies or offices in the U.S. government. We held lots of hearings around the country to get input, to gain insight, to go out and visit and understand regional sensitivities, sectoral sensitivities. And we quickly came to many of the same conclusions that the Pew Oceans Commission and the U.S. Commission on Ocean Policy did, that the current ocean efforts are very issue by issue, sector by sector, not very well integrated, not holistic. The left hand often doesn't know what the right hand is doing. There's no overarching direction about what do we want from oceans. And the result has been significant degradation within U.S. waters. The committee recommended to the president, and the president adopted a sweeping set of policies, now called the National Ocean Policy, which was codified in executive order in June of 2010. And that executive order, summed up very succinctly, says that healthy oceans matter. It puts a primary focus on stewardship, and it says that we need to do a better job of coordinating across the federal agencies and between the federal agencies and the regions in ensuring the delivery of the benefits from oceans that people want and need. It says that oceans are becoming increasingly crowded places and that we need to have smart planning to enable not only to deconflict those areas, figure out what combination of activities can coexist while minimizing conflicts, but also what combination of activities can result, or how can we minimize negative impact on the functioning of the ocean ecosystems that are providing the benefits that we want. So pretty broad, very forward-looking, nation's first ever ocean policy is a major success, a major landmark. That sets up a National Ocean Council, which is the explicit mechanism for integrating across the federal agencies. And it sets up the expectation of regional planning bodies that will allow definition of goals and decision-making at the regional scale to interface with what the federal government is doing. Unfortunately, a lot of the rollout of this national ocean policy and what it meant, and much of the back and forth in discussing what it meant and what the implications were, has been significantly distorted in ways that portray it as something that it's not. It is not, for example, a federal imposition of its will on the states and regions. It actually is empowering and enabling regional participation and input in collaborative decision-making. It is not an effort to focus on only process. A lot of the discussions focused on process. A lot of the descriptions of the what would happen after the policy was released were very processy. And that actually has caused a lot of problems because there was insufficient attention to what are the benefits, why should we do this, what is in this for many people who care deeply about using oceans on a sustained basis. So there were a lot of things that we can point to in the way that the policy was rolled out that have been somewhat problematic. Moreover, there were significant vested interests who felt threatened by this more holistic approach, who did not like the fact that there was going to be a new standard, a new focus on stewardship. Business as usual was working well enough, and they didn't want something different. And that has resulted in a significant backlash about the policy, again, misframing it, mischaracterizing it, and creating some very significant challenges. Certain I think in many regards, the policy was misportrayed as a federal stick, a hammer that was going to force everybody to do something. Whereas in reality, I would characterize it as a carrot. It does require federal agencies to coordinate, but it provides incentives. And so much of the focus more recently has been very much on the carrot part of it. Federal government helping to facilitate planning, smart planning at the regional scale by way of providing resources, not only financial resources, but information resources, information to plan, information to coordinate. And I think the new implementation plan for the National Ocean Policy that was rolled out just recently is a major step in the right direction in focusing on why is this useful, what are the benefits, and getting away from some of the just focus on much of the process that was sort of bogging things down. Finally, in that regard, I think there are a lot of new tools that are available to help with smart planning in various regions. And I would highlight the work that Natural Capital Project has been doing with tools like Marina Invest as ways of helping stakeholders understand some of the trade-offs in different benefits and ecosystem services that might come with different uses of oceans. So that's sort of what I wanted to lay out with respect to the National Ocean Policy, and the main messages there are simply that it is a major accomplishment in terms of having this policy. To actually implement it, though, is very challenging. We've made some good inroads, but we sort of got pushed back and are now sort of beginning to recover. the way forward for that is very much a function of how much support it continues to have and how much specific regions can take the initiative and demonstrate that it is useful. So in my view, the ball is really in the court of some specific regions to show that it actually is helpful. Why is this better than what we had before? And that, I think, is a huge opportunity. I want to shift now to fishing, and specifically in U.S. waters, and remind you that the Magnuson-Stevens Act that was reauthorized with amendments, significant amendments in 2006, lays out a very significant both set of guidelines, aspirations that have teeth and specific timetables. And that combination of teeth and timetables is, I think, a significant key to the progress that has been made. It was passed at a time when the progress that needed to be made was pretty easy at first and got harder and harder and harder as the deadlines loomed. It was sort of like balloon payments, where early on there was very little pain. And the farther we got to the deadlines that were looming, which was supposed to be the end of 2011, the tougher it was. And so that happened during the time that I was at NOAA. The charge to the councils and to NOAA was that every fishery that is managed federally had to have a fishery management plan that has an explicit, or that is explicit about how much fishing can occur, that will end overfishing and allow rebuilding of fisheries. So teeth and timetables are great, but not easy. We didn't actually make the 2011 deadline. There was one fishery that required interaction with the state, and so that was the one that actually didn't get resolved until June 29th, 2012. So that's a major milestone. And now we have in place a fishery management plan for every one of the federally managed fisheries. That is very, very significant. It entails a lot of pain. It entails a lot of angst. It entails a lot of argument. But the Fishery Management Council stepped up to the plate, being pushed and prodded and enabled by the NOAA scientists. And I would characterize these Magnuson rules as very much a stick approach. This is something that is that you must do. It's very much rules and regulations. Coupled with a carrot approach, I think is the way that we're going to be making the most progress. So traditional fishery management focuses very much on regulations, what you can and can't do, and does not change some of the incentives that are perverse incentives in fisheries. There's still the race to fish, there's still intense competition among fishermen, and programs such as Catchshare programs that are rights-based do a much better job of aligning the short-term and the long-term, of aligning economic and conservation incentives, of giving fishermen an explicit stake in the future. And we developed a Catchshare policy at NOAA explicitly because of the scientific work that had been done looking at global fisheries and telling us that fisheries that were managed with some kind of Catchshare program were doing much better than fisheries managed under traditional fishery management. The charge to the councils was, under this new policy, that each of the councils should consider Catchshares as they are putting together a fishery management plan. Our policy has been mischaracterized as forcing Catchshares on everybody, which is absolutely not the case. Each council was simply asked to consider Catchshares, and if they were relevant, if they were appropriate for a particular fishery management plan, NOAA would enable the plan to go forward and help financially in getting it underway. So there were some financial incentives. Fast forward to today, a third of our fisheries are now under Catchshare programs. And there have been some remarkable successes in a number of them. Most recently, the West Coast groundfish ITQ fishery that has, after 1 year, brought immense both economic and environmental benefits to the fishery. Discards are very significantly down. The profitability was much significantly increased. Any one of those Catchshare policies, Catchshare plans, none of them is perfect, and there need to be refinements to all of them, and that's what a lot of folks are focused on. The devil is in the details in these plans, and so getting it right and allowing for the plan to evolve through time based on experience is really important. So I want to draw a distinction here again between carrots and sticks and say that I think that the combination of carrots and sticks in fishery management is very powerful. And having explicit teeth, timelines, deadlines, and guidelines that are for example, what's in Magnuson is important, but in the long run is not going to be as durable as changing the incentives within the fishing industry and allowing fishermen to be smart, good businessmen, to have more flexibility in making decisions about their businesses. As one fisherman told me, I can finally see the light at the end of the tunnel. We now have an opportunity to move forward, and we had been in this downward spiral for so long, it was just really, really depressing. So I'm oversimplifying to some degree, but I want to just draw this distinction between the power of combining the sticks and the carrot approaches. Stick approaches create backlashes and resistance and provide lots of incentives to get around the rules, and that's what we see playing out in a number of fisheries. We also paid special attention to the composition of the fishery management councils that are actually in charge of putting together these fishery management plans. And doing that entails it's complicated because the governors propose members for the council. So you can't get good council members if you don't have good nominees coming from the governors. And so one of the key but hidden to many people linchpins in this whole process is getting good nominees coming up through the governors to the selection that the Secretary of Commerce makes for the members that will be new members when others rotate off on the fishery management councils. Fortunately, when I was there, we had a lot of very good nominations and were able to ensure that a lot of the new people on councils really were thinking long-term, were representing in a balanced way the different aspects of the considerations that need to go into play. But that cannot be done if there aren't good nominations. So I just want to flag that for you. There are a lot of different regional flavors from one part to another. Alaska is very different from New England. It's very different from the Gulf. And we can pursue some of that if anybody is interested. But that provides a lot of the interesting both fireworks and rewards that is entailed in fishery management. I want to say something briefly about recreational fishers because that, in fact, turns out to be a growing community within the United States, very potent political force, and one that presents some very significant challenges, not only with the National Ocean Policy, but with fishery management more broadly. The recreational fishing community is very diverse. There is the full spectrum within them. Many are very conservation-minded. Many of them aren't very well aware of the impact that they have as recreational fishers. And the organizations that represent them, in general, are not always on the same page with respect to the need for strong conservation. We've spent a lot of time working with the recreational fishing community. They ended up getting more seats on the councils while I was there. We gave them a lot more special recognition because they said, rightly so, we just are never even on the radar screen of NOAA. And so that changed, but there still are very significant challenges. They are politically very important. So I think there are some both important opportunities, but some very significant challenges in moving ahead with that community. I think since the year 2000, 32 stocks have been rebuilt. 32 stocks that had been overfished have now been rebuilt. And I think that's a really encouraging statistic, especially when you recognize that most of those have been declared rebuilt in the last few years. So the Magnuson changes are in fact beginning to work for many fisheries, and especially where there has been a shift to Catchshare programs, there is now an acceleration of progress. So I think that there is strong potential to end overfishing and to rebuild fisheries and have fisheries that are sustainable and that are profitable. And that is the goal. It's an achievable goal, but it is one that will take sustained engagement. So we've turned the corner. We've got the fishery management plans in place. We're rebuilding a lot of stocks, but there are huge challenges. Climate change and ocean acidification are a major one, and we've seen very significant changes in New England that were a surprise. Stocks that we thought were rebuilding, that were on a good path, in fact, have just pretty much had the bottom fall out. And so that is not conclusively connected to climate change, but it actually is a reasonable working hypothesis, if you will. So how do we manage fisheries in light of climate change and ocean acidification is a major, major challenge. Another challenge is the political one. As these timetables and deadlines are coming, have come due and are in operation now, there is a backlash to many of them, especially those that are not Catchshare programs. And that, in turn, is creating momentum to change the rules. Magnuson will be up for reauthorization. There are going to be some very significant efforts to roll back the progress that was made. And so one of the major challenges in the U.S. going forward, I believe, is to not backslide, to continue the progress that has been made, but make it even better. And to do so in light of climate change and in light of the fact that there is a lot of political noise around a lot of these issues is not going to be an easy thing. The recreational community is a key player in this, and they are politically very powerful, and a strategy for working with them to ensure that we have sustainable fishing is, I think, a major challenge. There's escalating demand for more and more stock assessments and more frequent stock assessments. Those take money. New approaches that enable us to do stock assessments more efficiently without, instead of just doing them the same way we've always done them, to do them in a different way, I think would actually bring huge benefit because it's expensive to do the stock assessments the way we do them now. So there are a lot of opportunities that are out there, but a lot of real significant hurdles as we move ahead. I want to shift now to European fisheries and to use this as an opportunity to talk about the power of one. And in particular, one person, Maria Damanaki, who is the EU Commissioner for Fisheries and Maritime Affairs. She is a remarkable woman, and she came into her position, took a sense of what was going on, and realized that fisheries in Europe have, in general, not been well managed, are in a pretty bad state, are not sustainable. And she implemented a dialogue and a process to reform the common fishery policy that guides fishery management in the European Union. This has not been easy. There was significant backlash from the countries that didn't like what she was doing, that were many of the bad actors. And she has persisted. She's found allies. She spent a lot of time with me, with my team at NOAA, understanding Magnuson, understanding what works, learning about Catchshares, and looking to the U.S. As a way of gaining ideas about what some of the possibilities are for their common fishery policy reform. She did this with other nations as well, but a lot of what they have designed, in fact, is modeled after what we have done in the U.S. with teeth and timetables, and it's much, it is adopting the stick approach, but not the carrot approach. There was a backlash by many of the NGOs in Europe against Catchshare programs, what they call transferable fishing concessions, and so that's not on the table. I'm hopeful that it will be sometime down the road, but that's the state of play. They're still in the process of this common fishery policy reform. It's making good progress, but it's not complete. But because the US, EU, and Japan are the three largest importers of seafood in the world, and because the EU is a very important fishing nation in terms of what it catches, having its policies be more sustainable is very powerful, and efforts to enable that to happen, I think, are worth focusing on. I want to shift now from EU and US fisheries to international fisheries and say just a little bit about this. A lot of people have just thrown their hands up with the impossibility of reforming fishery management councils and doing anything about IUU fishing, illegal, unregulated, unreported fishing. And I think that's highly unfortunate. Nonetheless, it is really, really hard to do something about many of those. Not all regional fishery management organizations are poorly managed. Some are much better than others. But we made some very significant efforts with Russell Smith as the Deputy Assistant Secretary for International Fisheries at NOAA in the lead, and Rebecca Lent, to really introduce into many of the regional fishery management organizations more science, more accountability, more requirement that the science be adhered to, so what the stock assessment said would actually guide decision making, not just sort of be shared and then ignored, and that there be an emphasis on precaution and compliance and enforcement. I think we're making baby steps in those directions, but it's really, really difficult. And that's a huge global problem, especially when you think about seafood as really a food security issue. And when you consider that seafood, that about 3 billion people depend on seafood for their primary source of protein. For us to be depleting oceans and not fishing them sustainably, not having healthy ocean ecosystems that provide those fisheries as well as a breadth of other benefits is a very significant global problem that has not warranted the attention that it deserves. We made some very significant efforts to tackle IUU. I signed an agreement with Maria Damanaki representing the EU. I was representing the US to tackle IUU fishing together. Japan and Europe have signed a comparable agreement. There's much more international attention to the problem of IUU, And I'm hopeful that this will result in some significant progress. We work closely with FAO and with other like-minded nations to create a new treaty, the Port-State Measures, that acknowledges explicitly that the oceans are a big place. You can't enforce every place, but all those ships have to come back to a port. And so the Port-State Measures says very simply that boats that have been identified as fishing illegally cannot come into a port of a country that has signed this agreement. It's in the early stages of ratification, and we will see how that goes. That legislation was introduced, both the treaty and the enabling legislation was introduced in the last Congress by Senator Inouye. I'm hopeful that it will be reintroduced this session with a comparable bill that also focuses on not allowing illegally caught seafood into U.S. markets. So there are some very important legal tools, policy tools, that are needed to help move this along. There's also new technology and new opportunities on that front. I think the Arctic represents a very special window of opportunity, but one that is very, very challenging in this regard. There are very few commercial fisheries in the Arctic now. I would like other countries to adopt what the U.S. has done. We have a fishery management plan for the Arctic, specifically U.S. waters, so Beaufort, Chukchi Seas, that says explicitly there will be no commercial fishing in the Arctic until we have the scientific information to know that we can do it sustainably. That's really what we should be doing. It's not what other countries are doing. There is a recent international meeting to discuss this, and other countries are a little skittish about going down this road. So I think that this is an area where sustained efforts are needed because the timeline is short. And wouldn't it be nice for us to get it right from the get-go instead of doing like we've done in every other ocean basin, which is overfish it, deplete it, and then sort of say, uh-oh, now what do we do? How do we recover? So we have an opportunity, despite the fact that the Arctic is changing very, very rapidly, to do better by fishery management, but only if there's the political will to do that. So I'm running short on time. I've talked about the 4 different big areas. I want to just flag some others very quickly and mention habitat, because that was an area where we had, with the stimulus money in the very beginning of '09, we had an opportunity to use $167 million to do habitat restoration in coastal areas. We did an RFP for anybody who wanted to send proposals for habitat restoration. Had to be shovel-ready, had to create jobs right away, had to bring long-term economic benefit or environmental benefit by restoring habitats. And I was blown away by the number and the quality of the proposals that we received. We had $167 million. We received $2 billion worth of, $3 billion worth of proposals. So just huge disconnect between what we had to give out and what was available, or what the demand was. And I think this is a huge untapped potential that bears thinking about, especially when you consider cranking the numbers after the fact, that for every $1 million that was spent on habitat restoration, we created upwards of 17 jobs, which is more than twice the number of jobs created by transportation and by oil and gas for the same $1 million investment. So habitat restoration has huge potential for job creation in a time when jobs are scarce, especially in coastal communities, and for long-term, so short-term economic, but also long-term economic benefit. And we haven't really tapped into that to the extent that we need to. Aquaculture, NOAA created the first ever aquaculture policy that it's had. It has a focus on sustainable aquaculture, and there has been some progress. We've been focusing primarily on the National Shellfish Initiative in working with shellfish growers to facilitate development of shellfish aquaculture, both for food but also for habitat restoration purposes. And finally, I want to touch very briefly on national marine sanctuaries and just let you know that within Congress there is absolutely no way right now, because of the particular individuals that have key positions on key committees, to create any new national marine sanctuaries. But we can legally expand existing sanctuaries, and that was the path that we took. There's very significant expansion of some of the sanctuaries as supported locally, because that's really the key to the way the sanctuary program works. I think that I'm going to come back now to tie some of these different threads together and focus your attention on sort of the future of oceans, the future of large marine ecosystems, the need to have them be resilient in the face of change, and that's both increased human uses because of growth of human population. It's also because of climate change, ocean acidification, and other things. And the need to think differently about management in a way that is indeed more holistic, more science-based, but is more precautionary. Using marine reserves, no-take marine protected areas, especially in things like TERFs, territorial user rights fisheries, coupled with, so that's combining rights-based fishery management with conservation. Thinking about what does adaptation in oceans look like, using no-take marine reserves as buffers for the uncertainty that is inevitable as climate change, as oceans become more acidic. That whole suite of packages I think it represents a different way of thinking more holistically about oceans. But to get to those places, focusing on the incentives is a really important part. It's information that's available to people, and it's the incentives that will result in individuals and institutions doing something different than business as usual. So again, carrots and sticks and some combination thereof, but more holistic science-based ecosystem approaches. And I think that sort of is the challenge that lies ahead. Impediments to further progress include lots, but I've flagged some of those. I would say in conclusion that law and science and policy all must work together for success. That progress is episodic, and sometimes you're not making progress and all of a sudden a window of opportunity will arise. So one challenge is, how do you create those windows, and how are you able to capitalize on a window when it does open up? And that requires sustained and savvy engagement. Science is necessary for much of this, but it's not sufficient. And I think that we need really strong leadership within agencies at multiple levels, but not just inside government, outside government. And it's that inside, outside, multiple level, local, regional, state, federal, international. And those people, I think, need to have more systems thinking. I think we're really losing out because people are still seeing sector by sector, issue by issue, and that's the way a lot of our laws are. It's the way a lot of the regulation is now set up. And so getting these more holistic approaches, for example, through existing tools, NEPA analyses that consider ecosystem services in a more holistic way is one opportunity, but there are others. So I think there are mega challenges looming. I'm very proud of the progress that we've made. It's been quite significant, but we don't have any time to waste. Thank you. Thank you all. I'm happy to take questions. Yes. And I remind you, we need to use the microphones because this is being recorded. So just come to there are microphones in both aisles. And to make this efficient, if somebody else has a question, start lining up, and we can just sort of take as many as we can.
Hi, I'm Catherine Kilduff, and I work at the Center for Biological Diversity. And I know that you've written a lot in your career about using science in management. And you touched on this a little bit at the end, how you need science. It's necessary but not sufficient. And I was curious, in the fisheries management context, science is becoming increasingly politicized. And it's clearly from the emphasis of the Magnuson-Stevens Act on science, but I was wondering if you think that there's a downside or if there's a way to create strong leadership to somewhat insulate the scientific process from money and political forces, or if that's necessary.
Yep. So one of the things we did at NOAA was to create a scientific integrity policy to protect science from political interference. And that creation of a scientific integrity policy was directed by President Obama in his executive order to all agencies. NOAA's is particularly strong and says in no uncertain terms that you may not distort or cherry pick or suppress the science. It also says that scientists are free to talk to the media directly without going through a gatekeeper, which is a major departure from the past and from what most other agencies do. So that's one part of the answer to your question, is making sure that the science that is at the table is in fact protected from political interference within an agency. Magnuson-Stevens has explicit direction that fishery management plans are to be based on the scientific information that's available. And so there is codification in the law about that, which actually makes a huge difference. That has created a backlash within Congress because there are fishermen that don't like that, not all, but some. There are members of Congress, not all, but some, that don't like that. They want some other outcome than just based on the science. So this is one of the things that will undoubtedly come up as Magnuson is up for reauthorization. And it is, what is the standard for making decisions? That will be really, really important. In the end, however, I think, in my experience, having those pieces in place, the standard that talks about science and the scientific integrity, are really important. But people often use the science as a place to argue when in fact that's not really the issue. And it's just an excuse. It's an easy target. And to the extent that you can have management systems that are essentially collaborative and that align economic and conservation incentives, that dynamic is radically changed, and the arguments are no longer about what do the stock assessments say. It's how can we do a better job of knowing what's out there and managing it together. And that is, I think, a very powerful argument for the kinds of fishery management that is like in Catchshares. That can't be applied to all kind of situations, but it is something that is worth thinking about. How do we change the incentives? Because in the end, it's not always really about the science. The science is just the tip of the iceberg that people focus on. Next question.
Hi, I'm Willow Batista. I work for Environmental Defense Fund. And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about the Arctic moratorium. And you said that sustained effort was needed to encourage other countries to follow that path. And I'm wondering if, what kind of opportunities we have to put that pressure on those countries.
There is something called the Arctic Council that coordinates the discussions among the Arctic nations about various things they care about. And that's really the place for considering things like this. And there is fishery management not only in the waters that are overseen by each of the Arctic countries, but there also are international waters. And other countries, not Arctic countries, are seriously interested in those international waters. It's called the donut hole. It's just, what's in the middle of the Arctic Ocean. And there have been discussions underway about, do we want to have some agreement about who can and can't fish there and under what conditions? The U.S. was promoting a precautionary approach, not unlike what we took for our fishery management plan for U.S. waters. Other countries aren't seeing it in the same light, but I think this is still in the early stages of the conversation, and so there is room for working internationally to help have what I think would be a smarter outcome than sort of the direction that we're headed right now. Yes, and I think this needs to be the last one. How are we doing on time? Okay.
Hi, my name is Sal Jorgensen from the Monterey Bay Aquarium, and I'm curious to know your thoughts on scientific uncertainty with regards to policy, as we not only just fishery stock assessment, but as we move to more holistic systems and more complex systems, climate change, the uncertainty in science is growing larger and larger, and that seems to be an issue with developing policies.
So scientific uncertainty is a reality. We don't have perfect knowledge about things, but it's often used as an excuse for business as usual. And so I think that just needs to be understood. I think it's really important for scientists to articulate the level of certainty, not just what's certain and what isn't, but the level of certainty with different kinds of things. And I think it's important to have not only ways of talking about that are understandable, but that are connected to how people think about uncertainty in their daily lives. People deal with uncertainty all the time. It's not that big a deal. And we have ways of dealing with it. So I think oftentimes, and in fishery management, until the Magnuson reauthorizations, scientific stock assessments would be shared with councils, and there would be a range, not just an average, but it might be as much as this or as low as this, and quite often what would happen is that the choice would be to take the range that was most favorable to the most fishing. And so I think having legal and policy guidelines that help, that are framed around acknowledgement of uncertainty, but the need to act precautionarily is really important. And in statistics, there are widely acknowledged to be two different types of errors that people can make. And one question is, do you want to err on the side of saying something is happening when it isn't? Or do you want to err on the side of saying something isn't happening when it is? And which of those you choose makes a huge difference. And who has the burden of proof to provide the information? And we have different standards for dealing with that in different arenas of using science in decision making. And I think it's worth thinking more deeply about for the progress of science, and when human activities had minimal impact on ecosystems, it was perfectly appropriate to say something isn't happening until you have overwhelming evidence that it is. But I think we're in a very different world now with a lot of activities that are affecting the environment. And to shift that perspective to avoiding a different type of error is eminently worthy of consideration. Okay, one more.
Hi, Amanda Cravens here, Stanford University. You mentioned the importance of making information available and also new tools. And I wondered if you could expand on the opportunities that you see, and particularly the roles of agencies and others in creating, maintaining those tools.
So did you have any in particular in mind?
Particularly around decision support tools, planning, those kinds of efforts that are starting but that are in fairly early stages.
Yep. So with smart planning, for example, not so much fishery management? Mm-hmm. Yep, okay. There are, so if we look at coastal and marine spatial planning, what some people are talking about now as smart planning, there are tools that are available to help think through what are the different options for use of an ecosystem, what activities can coexist, what are the trade-offs in delivery of ecosystem services. And I mentioned one tool, which is Marine Invest, which, are you familiar with that? So that is an example of a tool. But there are a number of other tools that are being developed by different groups about how do you think about more holistic ecosystem-based management. And I would point to some of the efforts that were done by some states. For example, Rhode Island and Massachusetts both had very concerted efforts to bring stakeholders together and think through how are we going to use this ocean that's in state waters. And Barry Gold, who is, will you raise your hand, Barry, has been facilitating a number of efforts in this regard. So if you haven't had a conversation with him, I would invite you to do so. Do you want to add to that, Barry? You want to say something about some of the other things that are... So, I mean, there are, and one of the things that the agencies are doing, one of the things that NOAA was spending a lot of time doing, was pulling together all the information that is relevant for planning. Because that's one impediment for a lot of small local groups or state groups. You know, state agencies are really strapped for resources. And to have together the physical information, the biological information, the legal guidelines for different types of activities all together in one place makes it a lot easier. And a lot of what NOAA is spending time doing with other agencies is, you know, we have something, USGS has something, Department of Interior might have something, and harmonizing those, making it all easy to find, one-stop shopping is really where the agencies are focused right now as a way of facilitating smart planning in regional areas. So you all have been very patient. Thank you very much for your time. Good luck with the great conference. I'm excited to hear how you're going to end up, all the great conversations you're going to have. Thanks for your time.